Good afternoon. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us for ARCCA's learning session on Safeguarding California. It looks like we have a few folks still trickling in, but we do have quite a bit to cover today, so we'll dive right in. We will be recording this webinar and making the recording as well as the slides available after the webinar. My name is Julia Kim, and I'll be your moderator for this webinar, and this has been organized by the Alliance of Regional Collaboratives for Climate Adaptation, or ARCCA, in partnership with the California Natural Resources Agency. Just a quick overview of today's agenda. I'll touch on some webinar logistics, provide a brief overview of ARCCA, and then on to the featured presentation on Safeguarding California. We'll have some time for participant Q&A and then a few closing remarks at the end. So everyone will be muted except for our panelists, and due to the large number of participants, we ask that you type your questions into the question box. And please do feel free to submit your questions at any point during the webinar. I'll go ahead and summarize those questions during the Q&A portion, which will then follow the main presentation. And any questions that we aren't able to get to, we'll ask our presenters to respond after the webinar and then share those written responses in a follow-up email. And again, this webinar will be recorded and it will be available on our website along with the PowerPoint presentations. I also want to note that all the registrants will be added to ARCCA's general listserv so that you can receive emails about future learning sessions as well as other timely announcements such as grant opportunities. And if you don't want your email added, please let me know and we'll go ahead and skip your email. So a brief overview on ARCCA. ARCCA is a statewide network of regional collaboratives from across California that work together to advance adaptation across the state, as well as to build resilience in their local communities. Our core activities include facilitating a robust peer-to-peer network across regional collaboratives and its individual members, as well as among adaptation practitioners across the state. We also foster knowledge exchange by convening regular in-person meetings and disseminating best practices, lessons learned, and resources through newsletters and these learning session webinars. We believe that regional collaboration is critical to effective and holistic adaptation since many climate change effects are experienced at the landscape level. And through targeted resources and ongoing technical assistance, we support emerging regional collaboratives across California. And one of our core activities is to engage with the state to create a more direct channel between key state agencies and local and regional agencies and organizations. We also review state plans and guidance documents to ensure that they reflect regional innovations, best practices, needs, and challenges. Our current membership of regional collaboratives cover the Sierra Nevada region, the Sacramento Capital region, Los Angeles County, and San Diego County. And the North Coast Resource Partnership and the Central Coast Climate Collaborative are in the final stretches of becoming formal members of ARCCA. And we're also engaging with stakeholders in the San Francisco Bay Area to form a new Bay Area Climate Adaptation Network, and we'll then be working to form a regional collaborative in the Inland Empire later this year. And the Local Government Commission serves as the coordinator for ARCCA, and the Governor's Office of Planning and Research is our state liaison who serves as the ex officio member on our executive committee. We also engage with a number of other state agencies, including the Natural Resources Agency. And we also have affiliate members who are working throughout California, as well as across the nation on adaptation issues. And if you have any questions, or if you're interested in joining ARCCA, please don't hesitate to reach out. And I'm really excited to welcome our all-star panel. Today we'll hear from Kaylee E. Bright, who's the Deputy Secretary for Climate and Energy at the California Natural Resources Agency, as well as Joey Wall, Special Assistant for Climate Change, also with the Natural Resources Agency. And we'll also hear from Nuantara Key, the Resilience Program Manager with the Governor's Office in Planning and Research. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to you, Joey.
Great, thanks. Well, actually, Kaylee E. is just going to give us a quick kickoff and introduction to the Safeguarding California plan.
Yeah, so thanks, Julia. So this is Kaylee E. Bright. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Climate and Energy here at the Natural Resources Agency, and I just wanted to jump in ahead of Joey and Nuantara to kind of just to open this up, and then I'll leave it to them so we have enough time to go through their presentations and respond to questions. Just very briefly, we wanted to talk to you today about what the state is, to walk you through the Safeguarding California plan and kind of talk you through what we at the state are doing across all of our agencies to protect current services, but also identify future service needs in state government as we face the impacts of climate change. We also want to talk to you about the linkages that we're working on between these state actions and local action. I think my day-to-day is working within these planning efforts, but also in the legislature. And I just want to emphasize going into this presentation that we're seeing a huge surge of interest from the legislature and stakeholders feeding into those processes around adaptation work. And what they're interested in is trying to find new structures and organizational models to approach these often paralyzing issues that we face around adaptation. And on the one hand, it's very exciting, but it's also very challenging for how do you look across all of these different types of state services to really prepare the programs themselves and their day-to-day work to address climate change, but then identify those major areas where we might need to look at new funding structures and new organizational structures to tackle much larger issues that these program areas will face. So, I guess my advice to people as they approach me is just in my messaging is that they usually approach us with a lot of panic and kind of an already paralysis around what to do about these issues. And it's really comforting just to tell them that, the work we're doing through safeguarding, the work we're doing between the state and locals, and really the work the locals are doing in their own regions is setting the table for these policymakers to jump in. And I think the more we understand what each other are doing, the more we can help strengthen all of these efforts, and then really be there for policymakers as they decide to turn and take on these issues. So with that, I'll leave it to Joey and Nuantara, and thank you again, ARCCA, for bringing this together.
Yeah, thank you, Kaylee, and thank you, Julia, for having us on. My name's Joey Wall. I'm the Special Assistant for Climate Change here at the Natural Resources Agency. I managed the Safeguarding California Plan update for sort of the past 8 months, or the last piece of getting it updated, and just wanted to run through today's presentation on what the state of California is doing to adapt to climate change, and also, more importantly, what will we do, and just provide a general overview of how the Safeguarding California Plan 2018 update answers those questions. We know that there are a lot of climate change impacts that are happening. This is just a sample of some of the things that we have already started to see in California and around the world. But we also know they're going to get worse. We know we need to reduce emissions to be able to manage these impacts, but we need to be ready and resilient for the impacts that are already baked in due to current emissions. And we have a positive vision that's shared across state government agencies for a resilient and safe California. This was developed by the Technical Advisory Council that Nuantara's Integrated Climate Adaptation and Resiliency Program convenes. And we added a foundational box there at the bottom of the slide about how government managers need to take climate adaptation into account in all aspects of their work in order to realize people, communities, natural systems, infrastructure, and built systems that are resilient to climate change. So there are a lot of other pieces that help create the possibility for this shared vision. As I mentioned, the Integrated Climate Adaptation and Resiliency Program works with local and regional partners. The Adaptation Planning Guide and General Plan Guidelines provide guidance to local and regional governments to adapt to climate change. The Adaptation Clearinghouse that Nuantara is going to talk about provides a one-stop access point to resources, science, and case studies, and that will be forthcoming. California's forthcoming 4th climate change assessment will provide the most cutting edge overview of downscaled climate impacts to California and academically proven solutions. And the caladapt.org website allows you to visualize the latest downscaled climate impacts. And what the Safeguarding California plan does is fits into that general conceptual framework to provide an overview of what state policies, plans, and programs are doing to respond to climate change. That's obviously part of an integrated response based on climate research, like the fourth climate change assessment and the forthcoming Indicators of Climate Change in California report that goes over what are the impacts that we're already seeing from climate change, as well as the work that I referenced on integrated local and regional action. Also, another resource that just came out was Planning and Investing for a Resilient California, a guidebook for state agencies that provides guidance on how state agencies can incorporate climate adaptation into all aspects of their planning and investing decisions. But the plan is designed to go over sort of all of these aspects of state government. It provides principles to safeguard California from climate change, and then delves into 11 different policy chapters and integrated climate justice chapter that shows how equity is interwoven throughout the policy responses in the plan. This framework is an evolution from the first climate change adaptation strategy that was released in 2009 and subsequent updates that helped clarify the state's policy direction in 2014 and implementation plans in 2016. One new thing from this update is the two social systems. You'll see many pieces of this plan were designed to show the ways that policy approaches are being integrated to deal with the holistic nature of adaptation solutions, because climate impacts cross-cut across these policy areas. There are two new chapters in this update. The climate justice chapter, like I talked about before, that highlights the way that equity is interwoven throughout the plan, as well as the Parks, Recreation, and California Culture chapter. These were added after extensive public outreach, and we heard that outreach and worked with state partners to communicate and develop better policy in those areas. It's probably a good chance to let you know that over 300 edits were made in response to public comment throughout the plan. We restructured the introduction and worked with many partners to reflect the best input from across the state. And you can find a report of each of those changes and where they can be found in the document on our website, which we'll go to later. This is a huge undertaking across state government to put this document together. We worked with 38 different agencies, countless staff across these agencies to put this together. Here you can see the lead agencies that we worked with for each of the chapters. So each policy area is led by experts with deep expertise and experience. So the policy experts and the people implementing these programs are actually the ones providing the survey of what's happening, as well as the direction that they're taking to move this forward. So this is a bottom-up approach in terms of getting the ambition of all these departments that know how best to incorporate climate adaptation and make California resilient in each of their areas. The structure of the plan provides several different ways to understand what the state is doing. Each chapter has recommendations, 4 to 10 recommendations that are found at the top of the plan or top of the page in a color block, and those are numbered. So in this instance, we see emergency management recommendation number 2. And those provide the broad policy direction that characterize a host of ongoing actions and next steps that state agencies are taking or will take to make the state resilient to climate change. Those next steps come next after a brief description clarifying the policy direction described in the recommendation. The next steps are numbered so that we can track them and report on those next steps over time. And underneath next steps not shown on this slide are ongoing actions, links to programs and activities that the state is undertaking that are already implementing the spirit of the policy directive in the recommendation. On the side of the next steps, you can see sector icons or chapter icons that redirect you to related next steps in other chapters, showing the way that next steps are related and are being coordinated across different state agencies. I wanted to touch again on the new climate justice chapter that shows the additional focus on equity in this plan. We developed 5 goals for the climate justice policy for the state in making sure that the communities that are least responsible for climate change but most vulnerable to its impacts do not suffer disproportionately, as we know is already happening. These goals were summarized from a report by the Climate Justice Working Group, which is a group of environmental justice and equity advocates that the state worked with over a year to get recommendations on policy directions and next steps that we can be taking. Each goal then shows the next steps throughout the plan, over 100 for all 5 goals, that show the actions that state agencies will take to implement climate justice in their adaptation strategies. So it's a way to see that intersectional cross-sector approach and the way that equity is found throughout the plan. Finally, climate change adaptation examples can be found throughout the plan, and additional examples can be found on our website. There are 12 in the plan and 33 online. These show state projects that are making a difference on the ground to make the state more resilient to climate change. For each chapter, you can find them in the plan, as well as additional programs and projects online. And those are specific places or programs that the state has invested in. To make sure that we keep moving forward and are transparent about our successes and ongoing work, we are required to annually report on the implementation of the Safeguarding California plan. That was a big focus in the design of this plan and why next steps are numbered and identified throughout the plan by a code. And we will release that implementation report in the fall to talk about both the actions that are identified for the state in the 2018 update, but also an analysis of past adaptation actions in 2009 and 2014, and how those plans have carried into the future and been implemented or still show opportunities. A quick overview of how this plan came into being. It's quite a document. It's got a lot of pages in it, and it's been a long road to get it to this point when we released it in January 2018. The draft plan was developed and approved over the first half of 2017. We had a long public process with public workshops and received many public letters. We worked with state agencies on edits and new elements to respond to public comments, and went through an interagency review and approval process, as well as a graphic design and post-production to make those elements of the plan that bring it together and show linkages across the policy areas. Looking forward, this August and September have another pulse of activity for climate adaptation at the state government level. California's 4th climate change assessment will be coming out, and that provides another great resource. Whereas Safeguarding California provides the overview of what state agencies are doing, the 4th climate change assessment will provide sort of the newest and most up-to-date overview of climate science, downscaled for the state and regions, as well as topics. but the foundation is built on 30 state-funded research studies that are oriented towards providing policy solutions to climate impacts. We'll also be releasing climate-safe infrastructure recommendations from the Natural Resources Agency in a working group that was convened per legislation. And we'll be working with the Local Government Commission and other partners on the California Adaptation Forum, which is the convening of adaptation practitioners throughout the state of California. And we'll be highlighting Safeguarding California and the fourth climate change assessment at that forum and how we work together across all stakeholders to improve resilient outcomes. In September, the Governor's Global Climate Action Summit will take place in San Francisco, and there will be integration of the state's adaptation work at that event, as well as a natural and working lands implementation plan focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But at the Natural Resources Agency, we see the way that natural and working lands mitigation solutions overlap with adaptation solutions. I'm going to pass it off to Nguyen Tara, who can talk a little bit more about how the Adaptation Clearinghouse that's about to be released in beta form fits in with the Safeguarding California framework. Nguyen Tara also was a key partner in developing the land use and community development chapter. So we just wanted to call that out and show the policy direction that the Office of Planning and Research, the Strategic Growth Council, and the Department of Housing and Community Development put together for developing resilience in the land use and community development chapter.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
Hey, sorry, this is Kaylee again. I just wanted to say one more thing just to add on to Joey's presentation. I'd love to say that in the development of this plan, we had climate change at the top priority of all of our program managers across state government that went into driving this. But I think, we really need to drive home the point that just the process of pulling together those program managers is one of the most important functions of the safeguarding plan. And I'm sure, those that work at different levels of government experience the same thing. There's a real challenge in making those program managers comfortable with trying to introduce this type of uncertainty into their day-to-day work. And in the safeguarding plan, you'll see a list up in the front of a lot of key staff across state agencies that dedicated a ton of time and really pushed hard to work with all of those program managers and get the information that shows up in the plan. And kind of lastly, just a thanks to them, but also going forward, these agencies, these recommendations are fed through the chains of command through the agencies, but what's needed is really a kind of reinforcement mechanism of the public talking directly to those agencies about whether or not their recommendations are sufficient or they should be more robust, or what people can do to help. So that leadership in those agencies sees the importance of further incorporating climate change into all of their program activities, because it's just a huge lift. And I think the more they hear from the public, the more they prioritize it. So thank you, and sorry to jump in.
No, that's a great point, and I think sort of speaks to the fact that we didn't jump into all of the different policy areas and programs that detail adaptation. If we tried even just in one chapter and delving into each of these recommendations in just land use and community development, it could be a webinar on its own. And we have 12 of those chapters, as well as a lot of statewide information that's in the introduction. So, that's where we encourage you to start flipping through the plan, go to where you're interested in, and it's really just the top layer, and you can delve deeply into all of the programs, into the different policies, and see how many layers down and how complex and integrated and robust a lot of the adaptation actions that are occurring are, but how much more we need to scale those up as climate impacts scale up as well. So it's a huge challenge. There's a lot going on. It's very complex. And the Safeguarding California plan is an access point to understand the complexity of what's happening, but also understand the direction that the state government is pushing to scale up those actions and how we need to keep scaling those up to meet climate impacts. And a resource that is also very helpful for that is the Adaptation Clearinghouse that Nwantara can take away. So we'll shut up now.
Great. No, thank you. Yep. So can everybody hear me now? This is Nwantara Key from OPR, and I manage our Climate Adaptation Program, which is the Integrated Climate Adaptation and Resiliency Program. And before I kind of dive in here on the Clearinghouse, I just want to extend a thank you to LGC and to the ARCCA network, and then also to Natural Resources Agency, to Kaylee and Joey for having me join here on this webinar. So before I dive into the Clearinghouse, I'll just give a really quick overview and some context around our adaptation program at OPR. Our program, the ICARP program, that's the acronym, was established through Senate Bill 246. And really the intent of the legislation and then of the program, kind of at an overarching level, is to better coordinate and align our state and local efforts around adaptation. So Joey and Kaylee E. Gave a great overview of safeguarding and a lot of the work that we've been doing and undertaking across state agencies to integrate climate adaptation into the work that we're already doing and the services that we're providing. But we also recognize the need for coordination and alignment of those state programs, policies, and practices with the efforts of our local jurisdictional partners, and that better alignment is needed really to move local implementation forward. So the work that we're doing at OPR is really serving in that role to identify how do we better align and support across state and local efforts. And when I say local, I use that very generally to include, work of our city and county partners, but also across regions, so MPOs and special districts. So really the broad suite of local jurisdictions that are working across the state. So within the context of our program, there are two key components, one of which I won't really talk about today, but it's the formation of a technical advisory council, which Joey mentioned earlier, and the work that we've been doing through our council also informed safeguarding. So that's been a great partnership with Natural Resources Agency. But the second component of the program is the development of an adaptation clearinghouse. So as Joey mentioned, we're just about to release the beta site of the clearinghouse, and we'll be doing beta testing and asking for input so that really the clearinghouse meets the needs of the users and intended audience. But the goal with the clearinghouse is to provide practitioners, especially thinking about local government and local jurisdiction practitioners, with the resources needed to really support implementation of adaptation efforts, both on the planning side as well as specific programmatic or project implementation efforts. So the clearinghouse is a database-driven resource. We've been working for a number of months to collect resources that reflect plans and policies, as well as guidance and decision support tools, a whole suite of different resources. As of early March, we have about just over 400 resources in our database, the majority of which really are California-specific. We do reference some key resources that we think are really useful and valuable that are either national in scale and a couple international, but really the goal is to focus in on resources available within a California context. So we have about 400 resources now. Users, when they go to the site, will be able to search the database by selecting through a number of filters or options that we've been tagging those resources by. We also are allowing, and this is where there is a strong alignment with Resources Agency and the Clearinghouse, but also allowing users to be able to access resources that are organized by topics. And the topics really align with the chapters in safeguarding with the addition of an adaptation financing and investment page as well. So that'll be one area or way that people can access the database of resources in addition to that general search function I mentioned. We also are working to build out a map viewer, recognizing that users may just be curious and want to know what types of resources are available or have been developed, so plans, policies, examples, within a certain geographic region, so a county or a broader region. And then we also are really working to build out a suite of resources that help provide practitioners with tools, data, and research to help inform inform decisions in the work that they're doing, and especially looking to CalAdapt as a very critical resource around projections and climate data across California. So if you would go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So another component of the clearinghouse is we've been working to pull together a suite of case studies. We will be releasing case studies later in the summer as part of the clearinghouse, so that still is in progress. And as Joey mentioned earlier, state agencies contributed a large number, I think it was about 45 examples of actions that are going on across the state in partnership with state agencies. So we've also worked to bring those examples into the clearinghouse. And then lastly, we're working to build out a series of climate stories that really highlight the value and benefit of individual action and kind of the stories from individuals across the state, and really trying to demonstrate how individual action can advance and support state and local policy and programmatic efforts to build resilience, recognizing, in order to really achieve our adaptation goals, we need action and activity across all levels of government and even down into individual action. So in terms of our process and timeline, we are, as I mentioned, going to be releasing the beta site here just within the next couple weeks, and then we will be conducting outreach and beta testing to get input and make sure that the site is actually meeting the needs of users and intended audience, and we'll be doing that through March and April, and then be working to release the full the public site in the summer of this year. So if anybody, if people are interested and would like to connect with us on opportunities to provide input via that beta testing process, please feel free to reach out. I think our contact information is at the end here. And we'll also be announcing a series of webinars and other remote ways that you can provide input in addition to just sending us feedback directly via a survey that will be on the clearinghouse. So with that, I will turn it back over. And again, thank you for having me join.
Thank you, Nuntara. And really quickly, we just wanted to wrap up. It's, saying, like our partnership with Nuntara suggests, this is really an integrated effort across California state government under Governor Jerry Brown. We're excited to work with all of our state agency partners, and like Kaylee pointed out, all of you who are doing adaptation on the ground maybe, or service stakeholders in making California resilient. So thank you. Before we turn this back over to Julia for questions and answers, I just wanted to go quickly to the California Natural Resources Agency website to show you how to access the Safeguarding California Plan and related information. Like Nuntara said, the OPR website, the clearinghouse will be really the one-stop shop eventually for all things state government and local government and just related to climate change adaptation in California. But for now, you can find the resources that we talked about today, as well as others, on our climate change website. So climate is one of the central initiatives of the Natural Resources Agency, both responding to mitigate emissions from the natural land base, but also adaptation policy across the administration. We do that, like I said, across the 3 buckets of state policies, plans, and programs, integrated local and regional action, as well as research. You can find the update here. You can click on it. The online and PDF versions have that clickable sector icon functionality that makes it easy to navigate across the document and find those linkages across policy next steps. Below, you can find the Safeguarding California in Action examples, the case studies that will be hosted on the Clearinghouse. And you can also find the responses to public comments below that section on our website, as well as past adaptation strategy documents and other information on these bullets up here. So with that, we'll turn it back over to Julia and all of you to answer questions that you might have about California's adaptation strategies. So thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Joey Noantara and Kaylee. We do have a handful of questions, and I definitely encourage all of our participants to submit additional questions. So let's kick this off. So it's really exciting to see the level of collaboration across all the state agencies that you mentioned. Can you touch on how this collaborative effort will continue to be leveraged on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, I can start off with this one. Along with Nuantara, we helped convene a climate action team of state agencies called the Safeguarding California Climate Action Team that serves as just a general forum for adaptation activities. And we, in addition to sort of the informal relationships that develop among state agencies, we're looking forward to develop that more formal space that works hand in hand with the other climate action teams internal to state agencies, like the Research Climate Action Team, or the Public Health Climate Action Team, or the Forestry Climate Action Team, that work broadly across climate policy. And internally, we find that just getting people together to talk about the programs and research has been really helpful. The fourth climate change assessment has been developed also in an interagency integrated way to inform policy. So research projects that are informed by, scoped, and managed by policy and program experts and practitioners across state agencies to directly inform state policy action. And those fourth assessment projects are sort of all developed with the same foundational climate scenarios. So we're using the same science across agencies. And you can see that with the recently released Caltrans vulnerability assessments, with DWRs, with the Department of Water Resources, integrated regional water management program guidelines, the Energy Commission's ongoing work with the Integrated Energy and Policy Report. There's just a lot of ways that we're working on a shared foundation of science. There's a lot of avenues within the state for coordination, as well as those informal relationships that develop between experts.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, so we're at this point in time where the state and the voters are making massive investments into state infrastructure, and kind of as we roll out these billions of dollars of infrastructure spending, many of those initiatives have adaptation kind of central in their priority areas, and Prop 68 is tied to safeguarding. The SB1 transportation funding is tied to adaptation. Local ordinances are tied. So it's really starting to be kind of brought in as the baseline policy direction for these funding measures.
And I would just quickly add, kind of reinforcing what Kaylee just mentioned, and what Joey had mentioned, is that from our perspective and our work at OPR as well, finding those opportunities to integrate climate adaptation into state funding programs is, I think, a really great leverage point in terms of helping to build capacity across state agencies and integrating climate into investments that we're already making. And so, we work, both OPR and SGC work to support state agency partners as they're pulling together, say, grant requirements or criteria for new grant programming or updating existing programs. And then I would say just on the in that coordination role, our advisory council, while OPR's role in this space is not the lead for coordinating across state agencies, that's Natural Resources Agency, but our advisory council for our adaptation program does include a number of state agencies. So we see that as another opportunity for that continued dialogue between state agencies and then also with local jurisdictions.
Thanks so much. I have another question. How will you track whether or not state agencies are reaching the goals of safeguarding California? And will each state agency have to report on their achievements on an annual basis, or will this be captured through ARCCA?
I think it's definitely a little bit of both. So we can maybe keep this round robin format. The Assembly Bill 1482, carried by Assembly Member Gordon, requires a 3-year update to the Safeguarding California Plan, as well as annual implementation reports produced by the Natural Resources Agency. So that's where we continue to work with the state agency leads on all of the chapters and are developing a way to analyze and track each of these next steps, the hundreds and hundreds of next steps that are identified throughout the plan. So the idea is that, yes, this year, while we have the 2018 update, we'll also have a 2018 implementation report. And our ambition for this round of implementation reports, as I touched on briefly in the presentation, is to include a look back at the 2009 and 2014 adaptation strategies to provide a more comprehensive look at everything that's been accomplished over the last 9 years of, of adaptation strategies, almost 10 years of adaptation progress since the first adaptation strategy was released. And I think there's a great story to tell in terms of how much is done, and also a lot of lessons to learn in terms of what have been some of the things that have not been implemented or the opportunities that still exist. So we're excited to do that. And I know Nwantara can touch on some of the things that her program will complement that with in terms of analyzing and tracking and evaluating adaptation progress.
Yeah. So we've been through ARCCA and are still in the early stages, but trying to figure out how do we evaluate kind of our progress at integrating climate into the work that we're already doing, and also achieving kind of our vision and goals around building resilience across California. And so one of the things that we're working on is trying to develop a framework for how we could evaluate our progress and really identifying where there are sticking points with the goal of figuring out how to overcome those. And so working with Natural Resources to make sure that the assessments that they're doing around and those updates or reports around implementation of safeguarding are part of that. We also are looking at how to incorporate state agency efforts to implement an executive order B3015 that was briefly mentioned before, that requires state agencies to incorporate climate considerations into planning and investment decisions. So we've been also working with the Government Operations Agency to figure out how we can integrate information that's coming through some reporting processes that they are leading up along those lines. So both of those will feed into the work that we're doing and will be really critical components to understanding where state agencies are at in this process and where additional resources or action is needed.
And one last note on top of that, if you're interested, especially on that evaluation side and metrics, there's an appendix in the Safeguarding California Plan 2018 update that focuses on sort of the best suggested metrics by state agency experts on how to track both climate impacts and government agency responses to those impacts. So we don't have the data or capacity to fully implement that metric system yet, but this is something that state agencies have already been putting a lot of thought into and are implementing at different scales and levels across state government. So there's a lot of things that are developing. This is obviously a new policy area, but we're hoping that this 2018 update, as well as the ICARP process, can serve as a foundation moving forward for tracking and evaluating state government actions.
Great, thanks so much. And how does the state plan fit into the work that local agencies are doing, and how do you envision the plan to be used to support local government efforts?
I think it depends which policy area you're looking at. I mean, I think there are kind of, right now we're dealing with this in forestry where, the recommendations in the forestry chapter, there are locals that have prepared plans and that really feed right into those recommendations. And then there's other places that haven't. And I think all the different policy areas have their own planning tracks. And then there are some centralized planning tracks that people are kind of, I don't know.
Yeah.
Not a great answer, but
I think that's a great point, just about the complexity of the adaptation policy landscape. And we definitely hope and have started to hear positive feedback from local governments that the Safeguarding California plan is helpful when they try to get a sense of what state government is doing and the policy direction that state government is moving in. And when Tara's ICARP program is helping communicate and coordinate those types of actions. So as local governments comply with Senate Bill 379, which requires them to incorporate climate change into their general plan safety elements and develop local hazard mitigation plans that incorporate climate impacts, there's guidance to do that with the general plan guidelines update, as well as the adaptation planning guide, which is also being updated to go along with all of these resources. And Safeguarding California provides that encyclopedia of what state government is doing and will do, so that local governments can connect to those things that they think provide the best leverage points for them to tackle local priorities. And this is definitely Nwantara's area, so we should, OPR is the body that coordinates local and regional adaptation action with state programs.
Yeah, I think you both described it well in terms of the value and role that the safeguarding itself as a plan can provide to locals. And I do think, echoing Kaylee's point, that it is probably not, it's not a one size fits all in terms of, every local jurisdiction is going to get the same thing from safeguarding, but it really is that inventory or encyclopedia, as Joey mentioned, to really identify what are state agencies doing and how can local efforts support those, and also how can those state programs support local efforts.
Thanks so much. And we have another question, really applauding your efforts of elevating the importance of climate justice and really prioritizing that. At the local level, with limited resources, there seems to be a tension between investing in infrastructure solutions and investing in meaningful community involvement. Do you have any recommendations for how local government staff can work on bridging this gap and gaining buy-in from higher level directors and elected officials?
Tara, do you want to take first stab at this one?
I was just going to say that is a really great question, and I think it is complex enough that I don't know that I could provide a quick answer to give that justice. But I would say that if people as a follow-up are interested in having a conversation around this, definitely be in touch. And I would also want to loop in some other staff here and our colleagues at OPR, Michael McCormick, who leads up or works on the general plan guidelines, as well as Elizabeth Baca, who's been working on the SB 1000 requirements and legislation, which requires some local jurisdictions to incorporate an environmental justice component to their general plan. So I think, we don't have a great kind of quick solution and answer, but I think that is definitely something that is a priority for us at OPR in terms of making sure that as we're moving our adaptation and providing guidance and support to locals around adaptation, that we're also keeping central the importance of integrating climate and environmental justice into that context. So there are other resources and I think other opportunities to continue that conversation, and we're very happy to connect on that.
And I would just add, I think our program managers are really, I guess we'll use the word desperate, but they're looking for examples of processes that have been successful. So where an agency does engage in a process that does bring in inclusion and respect for the communities around the services that are being proposed, and they have a good public process, et cetera. I think really highlighting those as examples to follow, because it's really easy to set up workshops in the old way that you set up workshops during times of the day that are not easily accessible to many people. And I just hear back from a lot of folks internally that what should really just like how they want to know how to set these processes up, and I think it's incumbent on all of us to kind of give them some clean examples to follow.
Yeah, and really quickly.
And
Sorry, go ahead, Nwantara.
I was just going to add, if people do have examples, or examples for what Kaylee mentioned, or other process guides or information that's out there that can really help support that type of engagement and deliberative process, that we would love to include those in the clearinghouse. We have a few resources that we've pulled in, but definitely always looking for more examples along those lines.
Yeah, and really quickly, just to add on to that, within Safeguarding California, we touch on some great resources developed by the Office of Health Equity within the Department of Public Health. So if you're looking for ways to show what local impacts on environmental justice communities from climate change might be, the Department of Public Health, let's see if I can find the correct link quickly enough, but has produced a county profile for climate change and health vulnerability for all 58 counties in the state, as well as some other resources that might help. The fourth climate change assessment will be building on those with an environmental justice and equity specific report that touches on the impacts of climate change to disadvantaged communities and scientific literature, a review of the scientific literature around those. So I'm not going to find it while talking, but definitely look at the public health chapter specifically for some of those programs and information that's out there in the public health space.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. We have a few more questions. We'll see how far we can go. This update process really seemed to stand out compared to other public review processes, especially the compilation of responses to the comments and input that you received was really demonstrated how you're holding yourselves accountable to responding to local and regional and other expert concerns. Curious to hear about how you made the decision to take on that effort, which I'm sure took a lot of time, and if you think that this is something other agencies will adopt as part of their public review processes.
Well, here I have to give a shout out to Emma Johnston here at the Natural Resources Agency, who really took on that project of public comment responses and also produced most of this PowerPoint. She is a force here who makes a lot of this work go, both on the adaptation side and the Natural Working Lands climate mitigation strategy side. And without that additional capacity, we definitely could not have produced that document. I mean, also a huge thank you to all of the departments who put in a lot of time creating those edits and then being open and producing responses. That's not something that's easy for a lot of state agency staff to do, or even if they want to do it, getting approval to put out those responses. So, I mean, I think it's the credit is really needs to go out to all of the public agency staff or the state agency staff who put a lot of time into those edits, to Emma, and I think it speaks in some ways to just growing capacity and dedication amongst state staff, and having such specific comments to respond to from public stakeholders, and the support that Climate Resolve provided during the public outreach process. We just have a lot of people to thank. So thanks to all of those people, thanks to stakeholders who provided us input, and we're glad that's positive. We definitely modeled the responses on what other state agencies have done, and hope that this can serve as inspiration moving forward for further transparency.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Joey, and special shout out to Emma. I think maybe time for one more question. As you know, climate change is a global issue and requires everyone's involvement. Are California state agencies engaging with neighboring states or other states in the country to share about the successes and provide some guidance?
Nwantara and Michael, have a lot going on. And if you want to go first, Nwantara, I can follow up with just a few more points.
Yeah, I would just say, yes, we are within the extent of kind of limited capacity to interact, engage outside of the work we're doing here in California. But one of the key areas where we've been working and engaging is through the Georgetown Climate Center. They hold monthly calls with people from across the country and across different states, really to help facilitate that dialogue and that information sharing and learning, kind of knowledge exchange across states. And that has been, tremendously valuable for us here in the work we're doing, to also learn from, how other states are approaching their work on adaptation across a number of different topics. So that's been one specific way that we've been able to kind of consistently on a monthly basis connect with our counterparts in other states.
Yeah, I want to second that. Shout out to the Georgetown Climate Center. We're working with them on our implementation reports and analysis, as they've been the ones who have tracked progress on the original 2009 California Adaptation Strategy, and their network is really key. And like the California Adaptation Forum that the Local Government Commission and ARCCA is very involved in, or host, that's involved in the National Adaptation Forum process, which provides that plug-in from the state to the national level. I wanted to give a quick shout out to Regions Adapt, which is a UN affiliated network of subnational entities working on adaptation knowledge transfer. They just put out their annual report in which California is cited throughout for some of its programs. So we're not only working with other states through different venues, but also internationally to share and learn about different adaptation strategies and approaches with other subnational governments. So that's an interesting report and initiative to check out if you want to zoom out to that international scale, where we definitely get a sense of how lucky we are in California to be so well resourced and have such great state staff and capacity to tackle these issues.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I think that's all the time that we have for today. So thank you so much to Joey, Nwantara, Kiali'i for joining us today. This has truly been informative. And as you noted, this is really just scratching the surface. So really encouraging everyone to check out the Safeguarding California Plan 2018 update, and we'll share that link out with everyone as follow-up. Just wanted to highlight, we do have a few additional upcoming learning sessions. We'll have the next two will focus on the Resilient Coastlines Project in from San Diego and some lessons learned there. As Nwantara mentioned, we are also conducting a listening session on the Adaptation Clearinghouse beta testing on April 18th. And take a look at that link and you can learn more and register that way. And there are a couple of new ARCCA resources to highlight. Our 2018 legislative tracking page is live on our website. So if you're interested in looking at any adaptation-related bills that are working its way through this session, take a look there. And then we also have a new roadmap to resilience that's focused on the transportation sector. This resource essentially looks at adaptation measures as well as associated planning activities organized by climate impacts and sector implications. So take a look there. We'll likely build this out to include additional sectors as well. And as a reminder, the webinar recording and presentations will be shared via email as well as posted on ARCCA's website. And with that, we'll conclude our webinar. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. And thanks so much again to all of our panelists for joining us.
Thank you.